So good morning, everyone. Thank you for accompanying us in this first talk. As Gabriela was saying, I'm really happy to be back here as a speaker after having hosted the talk for so many years, and it's even a greater pleasure to be able to exchange a few words with Andrea. As you may have seen in the title that was chosen for the talk, we are here to discuss the relationship between the knowledge that video manages to produce and the audience. No? So the knowledge produced by video that in turn engages the audience. And I think this is a really interesting starting point because I think that this approach is really key also to the work that you're doing now at Haus der Kunst, but you've been doing throughout the years. You know, Andrea has been curator at Pirelli Hangar Bicocca in Milan, then has been curator of international art film at Tate. And throughout his career, I think that his practice has been oscillating between these two poles, no? A profound knowledge of the work of artists or of one artist or a group of artists, and also the attempt to mediate this knowledge into an understanding that can reach out to the audience and also manage to build a sense of community. So maybe I would start from here. And this idea that we were talking about yesterday as well, that the tension between curating an exhibition and instead the will to build a program. So the difference between these two approaches in the tension between audience and content making.
Well, it's a beautiful and enormous question. I guess the simplest answer, I don't know if you should we leave this thing running or not? Not necessary. The simplest answer is that if you have the opportunity to work as a film programmer, which is not something I never did. I had to learn by doing it for a while. At the time I was at the Tate and I did it with Carly Whitefield, who was in the room mostly. You inevitably start thinking about what is the experience of the viewer in the dark room, and how do you build a form of narrative that either enlightens the work of an artist or somehow meanders around a topic that you don't want to illustrate in a banal way, but still raise, and this with some form of concession to the perception of time, the place you are within, and also let's say, what the experience is. Let's call it the simple experience. Now, from when you enter, what you hear when you enter, what is on the screen, what happens before, what is the rhetoric, what is the ritual, and what happens when it starts, and it's like 75 minutes or 80 minutes or less, then structure and produce a sort of ritual, but also written, and this written generates a form of affection, let's call it as such. That's to say, I think the best film programmer work this way. So when you move this to the field of exhibition making, and I happened to start film programming or like co-film programming relatively late, I realized that in fact that was what we were already doing or was already doing when I was working in thinking about what an institution can host and how do you generate the same approach of basically generating an experience. No? So exhibition making for me in particular, before dealing with moving images, was always driven by thinking about how do you make a mixtape, no? How do you make a cassette for your friends for Christmas, no? And you learn that today Rosalia has released a new piece with Björk, and it's amazing because it has to do with nature and preciousness and care and life under the sea and so on. And so you want to put this piece, but you want to burn it at the beginning. So, and this way of thinking, so how the experience is built and how you could build a narrative through a sequence of objects that specifically in my case happen to be time-based media objects is the answer. So the two fields, let's say, programming and specifically film programming and exhibition making, I was lucky to experiment with a while. And then when I happened to be in a position of generating the narrative of an institution, like now, I simply did somehow the same. So I started working by thinking about what is a program. It's not a sequence of exhibition. It's a real experience that unfolds throughout 5 years, no? And we set these stones, these pillars of these 5 years. That can be like a song with a specific rhythm, or can be an introduction, can be the music that you recognize every time, and can be a sequence of colors or a sequence of preoccupation. And then you work this way. And I'm convinced, to answer your initial question, I'm convinced that what I learned from moving images is that there's a transmission that goes through our bodily perception based on what we re-encounter that is somehow familiar, and what we learn from the first time we encounter again and again in a different way throughout time, and we are almost happy and mesmerized when we encounter again, even if it's different, within a physical place. Particularly knowing that physical places are in fact like institutions, like museums, like are places that are made for the community, for the local community, even though they have international inspiration, and they are like touristic venues. Could be Macba, could be partially touristic venues, or could be Pompidou, or could be that they, in fact, their function is for the local communities. And I believe the best way to make it working is to generate a program, a ritual that is based on connecting, like actually connecting what is in space. In that moment when you enter, and the moment you will be going back and back in the months or in the years. So I guess if one has the opportunity to work with moving images, programming, there is no better school, I guess, when you transfer to exhibition making and then perhaps institution programming.
Yes, I think this is a really interesting approach, and you mentioned something that I would like to dig into. You talked about bodily perception, because when we think of a modern museum, they are usually oriented to a visual engagement. So you enter a museum, you have a passive relationship with the artwork, you look at them, but you don't not engage with them. In the last few years, we've seen how institutions, especially public institutions, have tried to work around this concept and actually build programs. The Tate was an example also with a live exhibition that goes beyond a mere visual engagement between the audience and the contents. So I would like to know more about your take on it. So this idea of creating actually a bodily experience that involve all the senses for the audience, and also these ideas that I read in previous interviews that you gave of the space, the exhibition space, as a playground.
So really at the moment, images running off John Jonas' survey show at Hangar Bikoka. Hangar Bikoka is this huge, this is an interesting image. This is a snake. I mean, I can speak about a snake for a second. Hangar Bikoka is a huge cavernous, gigantic, let's say, former factory that is cinematic in principle, because it can be immediately compared to the studios, where if you ever have an idea about what a studio looks like, a Hollywood studio, this big empty spaces, they become magic. That is how it works. And that's why it was possible to set this bodily perception-driven experience. And I start from John Jonas because in this context, the context of video and moving images, there is no better luck than starting with an history that inherently, the history of video, has to do with identity, no, and body. And has to do, I mean, the video itself is a tool, is an instrument that is not even video anymore. No? I mean, when it was called video, when it was electronic, no? When it was on tapes, and then it slowly migrated, it became something in between, like the moment of electronic becoming like numeric, and then it became really digital, no? Already numeric, and the natural is already gone. No? And now everyone speaks about film and video, it's totally lost, this idea of what the natural was. But the natural inherently is being without definition. No? We know what it is, but the ontology is kind of strangely gone, because it was actually tapes, no, and magnetic and that thing. But when it started like in some German, American, Korean context between, Wuppertal and New York and so on, it started profoundly transdisciplinary, profoundly. It started in the context of fluxus. It started in between music, sound, and moving images. It started with bodies. It started with like women's like Joan and many other ones that we don't need to mention now, or men that wanted and needed to think about what was identity in that moment. Obviously seen from a, let's say, female-oriented and even feminist-oriented perspective, which is not mine. because I cannot embody it, obviously. This was a fundamental tool, no? It was a fundamental tool to revindicate a space and a need to be part of differently. But it was the tool that had to do with the body. And this is still there inherently. I think it's still there. So when you start working on displaying moving images, in respecting the way they were made, not necessarily single channel works, inevitably you have to begin a dialogue with the artist, if they're still with us, to understand what is the affordance of the work, let's say the installation, and how this work can perhaps be slightly seen in dialogue, slightly different from being isolated in a black box, perfectly set to get the impeccable experience, like if it was a cinema, mimicking a cinema experience, but whether this can be in dialogue with other works, and in different ways, and not the works not necessarily being moving image works, but being also like textile or fabric or fiber works, on how you can generate this narrative. We were talking about this program-oriented narrative within an exhibition. So it's bodily perception, because the encounter we have with whatever work, in whatever setting, is always through our bodies, not necessarily through our eyes. No, we may hear something before, and then we get closer, and by getting closer, you have this confrontation in which, in the case of video, the way it's set, you can also happen to have a screen that reaches the soil, the floor, and then how can you not think that there's a effect of, window, like a simple window effect, that bridges literally that space and makes the space deep. Artists like John have been working on this very specific preoccupation their whole life, not making something to be looked at like a painting, but something to bodily interact with. So this is something I believe really deeply, personally. So these are also the artists we choose to generate this program. So we go bodily perception, because we believe that we are all octopuses now, more than, if we really want to interrogate the legacy of modernity. And it's not enough to say the white cube and put a poster on the white cube and say this is to be interrogated. You have to really interrogate it, no? And you have to do it. You have to get rid of all the rituals. Be also the ritual of having a talk with two mics in your hand, or like having a politician speaking at the opening. You take it down. You say, sorry, Mr. Mayor, maybe if you speak, your credibility is not so strong as if I was telling in a different way, in a dialogue with an artist, that being the first row is more relevant. No? So by taking out all the ritual that generate the modernistic display, probably you really put it in critic or challenge the narrative. And I think this tool, the tool as it was intended by the first artist working with video and eventually with moving images, is the perfect one to challenge the idea of we are driven by looking and then being confirmed, or having a knowledge, let's say injection through reading a label, no? Whilst that's why we're saying we are octopuses, because maybe our brains are not like here, but like kind of everywhere, no? As it seems.
And I think the metaphor of the octopus is quite poignant also if you think about this idea of the program, no? And an institution that just not exists inside of its walls, but trying to reach out to the community, the territory. And this is something that I think you're also working on with Haus der Kunst. Mm-hmm. And going back to another metaphor, a music metaphor, since you're also really passionate about music, electronic music, I think this idea of transdisciplinarity that runs through the program at Haus der Kunst is really key. You mentioned before when we used to record cassettes to give to our friends, and this was actually an exercise of mixing different sources and put them together because they had a meaning for us. They would allow us to build a narrative that would bring together different sources, which is actually has a lot to do with how music is being made now. And so I think this is a really interesting metaphor to use to look at the program that you're doing, no? That also has an emotional part to it, as you mentioned briefly, and that achieves to build a sense of liveliness for the audience who inhabits Haus der Kunst by mixing different sources, coming most of the time by time-based media. Sound is a big part, performance, then somehow, and of course, video and film.
Well, yes, thank you. Making amazing, let's say, a marketing gesture, and I'm very, let's say, flattered. And yes, this way with the obsession of generating a real connection across everything that is displayed in throughout the year, but at the same time. So the intention is really, as always, let's say, raising. It's not only about that a specific pace comes back and certain number of BPMs come back in a room or in a space regularly, but it's more that you enter, you connect everything. This is how we can, as an institution, provide forms of learning in the moment when learning is so, I mean, the word education is somehow correctly maybe also gone because it's like top-bottom, but you want also to generate form of learning, and learning you want to orient it towards challenging narratives, no? The narratives are the dominant one that have been dominating like a century already, and even more, and it still are, because I mean, as we know, major institutions are looking for, like, desperately for that Yoi Kusama, no, room to have there, to have the people like running, like piling outside and having the the booking system filled with all slots and so on. No, like going to the usual suspect and, like, let's say, cooking Andy Warhol in any possible way to have a world show in dialogue with some whatever, let's say, line in his work. Not to criticize, on the other hand, to respect the practice of a fundamental transdisciplinary artist. So by how do you generate learning? I think it's like by having by displaying in the if you have more galleries, I'm lucky because I have them. Some let's call them exhibitions that are connected inherently, because the one artist, Fujiko Nakaya, has acolytes called Dam Type. They come like 20 years after in Japan, and they're really connected. And you make two shows happening more or less at the same time. But then in another room, you have let's say, a commission to Carsten Nicolai, who's a German artist who works with sound, and he makes an environment. It is completely covered in salt. I'm mentioning something we did a year and a half ago. For me, I imagine myself and imagine ourselves, the audience is entering and having a hook to maybe Carsten Nicolai, the German person, who in fact would never have been an artist or a musician if he didn't encounter the work of Fujiko Nakaya in Japan, where he went as a young landscape gardener in the 90s, no? And then he changes completely his understanding. So this story, we don't want to put on a wall, but it's a fundamental story that runs across the three, let's say, artists that are presented at the same time in the exhibition. But then there's another story, the story of two countries, let's say, Germany and Japan, that in the 30s and the 40s, like 1 century ago, were like extremely they're driven by extremely problematic, let's say, dictatorships, right? So how do you speak about the legacy of an institution, which is Haus Kunst, that was opened by Adolf Hitler in person? No? It was a propaganda institution. I think this is a way, this is a work by Carsten Nicolai I was mentioning. This is a slow, let's say, approach to raise question and say, okay, what is the connection between these two countries? No? What kind of form of learning I provide to the audiences, and why it makes sense to show in this moment Fujiko Nakaya with fog immediately, or still doing the COVID, let's say, catastrophe, when people have to be connected to briefing, no, or have not to be connected to briefing. And this is the learning, let's say, operational approach that we try to make happen, and we do not know if it's working or not, but at least as an ethical guide, it's important to do it, because these counter narratives are narratives that need to be shared. And that's the way we program everything at Haus Kunst. In with micro strands, like a strand of sound and music called tune that we have regularly every month, to what it looks the biggest, which are maybe the major survey shows. But in fact, for us, none of these is bigger. It's all part of the program. And they are all pillars of a building that is already trembling, because the world is trembling. And as institutions, I guess we are not able to feedback what is happening in the world now. I mean, if I think when I was working at the Tate, maybe already 5-7 years, we could have thought about a space called first response space, no? Where you have a work that you just saw maybe at the Istanbul Biennale speaking about the catastrophe happening in Syria, no? Or where there's a huge wave that comes in the US because of the terrifying, let's say, killings of African American humans, and then you can show a work. Now you can Now it's impossible. 5 years after, you cannot, because the reality is overwhelming us in a way that we have a catastrophe in climate. We have everything we know that we don't need to mention, but institutions have even no time to, or even no room to fit back. So I guess the only possibility we have is like to generate a situation of healing, a situation of producing still encounter and marvel through programs that are coherent and consistent. And going back to the very beginning, if we had this experience of programming, perhaps with moving images, perhaps it's easier. Perhaps it's more. The mentality is already set in that way, no? To make that experience meaningful and not ticketed oriented, no? Or not financially worked only. It can be worked financially, in fact. I'm confirming it can work.
Well, I think this is great, and I want to pick up on something that you mentioned, how the moving image can help generate this space for healing at the same times of reflection and learning. 3 things that you've mentioned. I think that it's also interesting because moving image as time-based media in general ask us to be with time, to experience duration in a sense, and in an age where we don't have time, where the moving images that we're surrounded by goes every time faster and faster. Even on social media, the representation of dramas and catastrophes, the tragedies that we're witnessing, they go faster and faster. So I would like maybe if you can talk a little bit more about the relationship between the moving image, time, and their display in the museum, and also this sense maybe of cinematographic feeling that also comes out of other installations, sound works, performance work, etc.
Well, enormous, but it's a really beautiful thread to write an anthology of texts beautifully written by the early thinkers of video, be programmers, be curators, be artists. When time was, from the very beginning, was a question, if you think really about it exactly, we mentioned already John Jonas or Dara Bierman, like those that have been extending, stretching the time and playing with it, but also the fundamental experiences of those that try to connect, no? And yes, we know like Marta Minuhin, Wolf Hostel, and Alan Kaproff together, they made this interconnected conversation in 68 across 3 towns in the world. So they made like a dream, like connecting for real time happening. So if you think about all this, once again, it's inherent in the medium, no? And therefore it should be considered and carefully shown, possibly never in a compiled way, possibly never one next to each other, because it's going to be making everything collapsing. But what is clear is that in big part, even the most narrative artists, the one that were preoccupied with trying to share new forms of narration, like storytelling, like John Jonas once again, in the end, there was a direct willingness of contact with the viewer, right? It was the intention of generating a form of sharing. Even the work was abstract, even was like the Vazulka work, right? Directly touching on the nature of the video, of the medium. The intention is to share. To share addressing, so to generate this form of almost docu-fictional aspect that then will become fundamental in the 2000s, like stemming from Harun Farokhi, no? Like so Hito Style, Jonah Comfra, and everyone else that has been clearly championing this idea of I can speak about literality with my personal take and share with you. So it's inherent somehow. It's inherent. It's part of the medium. So we have the privilege of working often or sometimes with a medium that speaks and tells and want to show other narrative and other perspective, not necessarily in a didascalic way, sometimes in a very poetic way. This is also the case of sound and music, in fact. I mean, it goes through words, no? And there is a reason why word and, let's say, spoken word, hip-hop, trap, however you call it, is like fundamentally part of this society. I was mentioning the Björk song today. It's a poem. Like if you have the opportunity to listen to it, maybe because we're in Catalonia and Rosalia is a superstar here, but everywhere. I mean, it's touching because it's a poem addressing to the listener. No, it's very maybe it's cheesy, but it's really direct. So this way of this opportunity we have and to share messages through artworks that are deep and challenging narratives within space is to be taken carefully, respecting the works. But it's the most let's say, powerful tool that is available for institutions, and therefore video in that sense is terrific and powerful to make, to hook and generate form of learning. I mean, you never know what really goes through, but there is a bodily perception related feeling when you encounter a work by Harun Farocki on video games, like the last one he was making. No? And if you think about this work, nowadays, 10 years after he passed, a little bit less, you think how incredibly visionary these works were, no? As you look at the work of Bruce Nauman, you think, oh my God, it's still incredibly visionary, or like whomever you could mention, because they're talking about what is happening now. Like now in this specific attack happening in this moment, this targeting system is there at stake. And Farocki made it, no? So I guess, and he displayed also in not a boring way, he just displayed it in a super challenging bodily relation oriented manner. So without being too much a video enthusiast, but it is a tool that has this extraordinary inherent story. And it keeps having it. Huh? I guess our function, when we happen to be in this section, this part of therefore programming, curating, and selecting, is just really the one of being also never forgetting where it comes from, ever. I mean, because it has a story. I mean, it's 50 years. It's like a lot. I mean, it's even more, in fact, now. So 60. So it needs to be seen. It needs to be perceived. Otherwise, you have the newcomer that gets in, have no clue. How can they know that this work was made 40 years ago? No? And how can they see how fundamental these works were for the present? But on the other hand, also to choose and to be brave and to go and look to those that are doing maybe weird things in places that are not necessarily capitals, but are out of the dictatorship of the medium itself. Because, I mean, there was until like a few months ago, a dictator is still there, a dictatorship of the voiceover, for instance. No? Okay, maybe we should be careful when we choose and select works with voiceover. It's been, let's say, redundant, and it looks at the voiceover became the drone, right? I mean, drone for everywhere. So maybe we should be careful and as, let's say, selectors or programmers, not obsessively looking for the last trick, but also looking for what is not necessarily the trick, but is the motivation, no? The urgency an artist has in a non-central place where the tricks are available, but the inventiveness is making the transformation happening. Because the beauty of the medium is it can be still rough. I mean, we walk through the fair upstairs, we are not anymore say, oh my God, this looks old, or this looks out of fashion, this looks like, oh my God, this was made 20 years ago. Because of the world now, because how everything is connected, the luxury we have is that we are less driven by this obsession. It was so much at stake in video for many years. It must be the new, let's say, the specific tone, the specific camera, the specific trick. So in fact, we have far more opportunities now, but we need to be rigorous and be open, no? Otherwise, we generate just a strange soup that is not highlighting what needs to be highlighted, which is quality and urgency, no?
And this makes me think of an essay by Ito Steyer that I was rereading the other day about raw images. And actually, I heard a talk that she gave a few months ago, and she was claiming the necessity of going back to raw images because in the rawness of the image lies the possibility of imagination. She was saying something like that. I have so many questions, but I think we've already run out of time, and I want to give the audience the opportunity to ask Andrea questions if you have some.
Hi. My question is back to time, thinking about the durational challenges of a viewer experience when you have a video exhibition with multiple works to view. And if you count them up, the total duration, I mean, at a show I was at in New York recently was maybe like 20 hours. So it's really impossible for a viewer to kind of experience that thing. I'm curious if you have, I mean, it's sort of a practical question, but also an experiential one, right? Which is to say, how do we respect the viewer's time and attention and think about that as part of the larger framework? of a curatorial?
Yes, well, not making video exhibitions in the sense that I think the starting point is maybe it's astonishing, it's fantastic to go to a show that's only video, but I guess we should be open, no? I mean, we need to be really open to every medium, and this medium specifically was born. The one we're talking about was born within the art world. It wasn't born like by itself in another field. So, and those that started it, and we should look at those that started it. We should never forget, in that sense, define themselves always as artists, not as video artists, right? And be John Jonas or be Wolf Fostel, the practice now it's extremely diverse inherently. So, I guess the first tool as programmers or like curators is just really acknowledging this and not overwhelming that experience of the viewer. Otherwise, it becomes really it doesn't work. Otherwise, it doesn't work. There are cases in which you want to do this. Now, you really need to do it because you want to show the spectrum of the work. But then you do it again within your place or within the situation you are with care and respect. I can't say what we do. I mean, that's what I can do, what we because that's personal. I mean, I wouldn't imagine a biennial, like, unless it's a biennial of moving images. But then also, it would be kind of wrong to show only moving image works. I think you have really to combine in a way that you generate an experience across. But I would never imagine a document like only with video. I mean, it would be killing the audience. It would be really not working at all. And when it's a precious tool that requires time, and even it's durational, it needs to be set in that specific way. No, well. When we, I understand exactly what you mean, and there are artists like Tony Cooks that only works with video, and he's extraordinary. Like, and you want to show the practice of the work throughout time. I guess what you can do, you make a show. You can decide to show everything chronologically because he's been consistently touching upon major preoccupation of society from a very specific personal perspective. It is also a provocative one, like not aligned to the main African American, let's say, thinking at stake. And I guess you should do it. You do it, but probably you find tools that are audience dedicated, and the tools are, if you're local, you pay the ticket only once, like, for instance, because you are accessing an archive that is displayed in space. And this archive is different from, or you can compare, yeah, exactly, or you set it in a space that is consistently seen as the space of the archive, in fact, no? Or has a specific, let's say, characteristic where you know that you're entering this stream of perception. It's not simple if you have to deal with artists inherently working with long durational works that are on 5 screens, and they do 5, 3, 2, 5, 4. That's a problem. There was an incredible show, and still going around in Europe now, I don't know exactly when, maybe it's going to be in Milan soon, a survey of Nan Golding, only made to slideshows. Extraordinary opportunity to see how all have work. On the other hand, it's challenging for the audience. It's really challenging for the audience. And that's why you have to find inventive apparatuses to display it. In that case, they found a very interesting, let's say, device that they curtained with round circles every single work, that in a way that you were literally entering in cylinders of time, and not black boxes, but little cylinders you will open and enter, and through that bodily perception feeling, you will enter the intimacy of that extraordinary artist that Nan Golding is. And seeing a retrospective of work, because in fact her slides are also her photograph her work, that enables the viewer to enter her world. And I think this experience wasn't boring, but it could have been extremely boring if it was like a sequence of black boxes, as it could have been shown. So I guess these are the challenges that we have in displaying. Now, always, how do you make the experience different? And this is a deal you make with the artist, no? And it's an offer you make to the audience that you have to commit, because we have no tools. Otherwise, we are like simply perfect, amazing service. So we just make it happen, no? As they want, as you get the manual. But is it exciting? Not so much. In fact, I mean, I become a logistic person, no? You don't want to make logistic. You want to generate experiences. So that's why you have to push, I guess. I mean, when everyone can decide if they can push or not. But I mean, I think it's time to push.
We have time for one more.
Thank you, Carolina, Andrea, for your interesting exchange. Well, I haven't seen your work at Kunst, but I saw some of your show at Tate, Andrea, and I see that you show mostly projection, installation, environment. So is it, you think, a reaction against the fact that we can see works on our telephone, on our computer, and so you built your museum as a space of resistance against a computer, against small tools?
It is a dialogue. It's a constructive dialogue in the sense that, yes, there for sure, but museums have also this, particularly museums that have big spaces like the Tate, have also this request of, as we said, of engage with the bodily perception. There's a chance we have, or they have, depending on what it is. And if you can break the walls of the actual space, or you can challenge the walls of the actual space, and at the same time challenge our habits by producing encounters that are based not necessarily on size, but it's not that you have to overwhelm the audience, but you have, I guess, to find the works, or to select and choose the works, or produce, commission works that twist that already metaversal experience, because it's not anymore that we are looking at, we are inside, in fact. Now it became Cronenberg, Vdrome, it happened, now we are in. I mean, we're just the inside that thing. So it's amazing, it's beautiful. I mean, it's extremely exciting, but it's also important to remember, to steam out what is space for art. It cannot be just inside, it needs to produce this change of experience. So by commissioning, selecting, and proposing works that are, let's say, embodying the idea of being inside, probably or hopefully you can question also this being inside this system, and therefore maybe either you overuse it, because I mean there are different patterns of reaction. Either like kids are overusing it to selfish themselves, and then it doesn't become anymore the tool you look at, but become the tool you become a producer with, which is quite interesting anyway, because that's a big challenge, a big change that I think everyone who was at the beginning of video was dreaming about, like la caméra au point, this thing that we can all take and use. Or you forget it because you are actually overwhelmed by the environment, and you are in that environment, you experience that critical, let's say, space that was produced by maybe a women artist who wanted to, through this critical space, showing that abortion is fundamental right in order to change the society, because you will feel what does it mean to be born through A Casa o Corpo by Elijah Clark, to make an example of a groundbreaking environment by a women artist. I think we are getting too much, I'm thinking a lot. But yeah, great question.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carolina. Amazing question.